Welcome. My name is Andrea. I'm the founder and CEO of Elm Cider Company, and we're really excited to do a live cider tasting tonight. It's the first time we did this. We've done this, like I said, so bear with us as we work through the kinks of trying to figure it out. But kind of our thought with this is we've had a lot of subscribers join our club that don't live in Indianapolis and can't come to our tasting room, but we want you to feel like you're a part of our club the way that our members who can visit us can feel. So we wanted to take some time to talk to you. Everyone that has this link is a club member, so you're among friends and also among people who are cider fans and fans of Elm. So we're pretty excited to be able to talk to you like this. So like I said, my name is Andrea. I'm joined today by two of our cider makers. Joseph on the far side is employee number one for Elm. He's been with us for 6 years, and he's our head cider maker. Every cider that we've ever made and that you have ever tried, Joseph created. So welcome, Joseph.
Thank you.
And then also with us is Wes Rankin. He's our assistant cider maker. He's been with us for about 4 years, and he also, since then, has had a hand in every cider that has come out and is especially interested personally in the sensory side and the tasting notes and the cider education. So having both of these guys here can give us a lot of information about each of these ciders. So to kind of go over how we're going to do things tonight, we're going to lead you through a guided cider tasting. We have our 4 ciders from our first subscription box. Obscura, which is our spring seasonal. Our January cider of the month is Old Fashioned. Our February cider of the month is Blueberry Lavender. And our March cider of the month is Blackberry Lime. And we'll pour a sample of each of these. Joseph will share a little bit about how these ciders were made. Wes will share a little bit about kind of how to taste them. And then we'll move on to the next. We would super encourage you to send questions along. We can see the chat, and we have Liz, who is the manager of this program, who has been sending you all the emails and literally packed every single, here she is. Here's Liz. She's the person behind your emails, and she packed every single box that goes in the mail. So we owe a lot to Liz, and she's manning the computer over there, getting your questions and passing them to us. So we would love this to be interactive. If there's something you want to know, ask us. Okay. So before we get started in the tasting, Joseph, could you share with us just a little bit about cider overall and how it's made?
Sure, yeah. So every Elm cider starts as fresh pressed apple juice. We use a lot of regional fruit from Michigan, as well as the state of Indiana. We get it fresh pressed on demand. Every time we're ready to make a batch, we call up our suppliers and they press it the next day for us. Then we ferment it like a wine, and that takes all the sugar out, gets it up to about 6.5% ABV. That's typical for a cider, and all the juice blends we get go up to 6.5. And at the very end, we'll finish it more like a beer in a pressurized tank with carbonation and a little bit of sugar sometimes to sweeten it if we're making something semi-sweet. We can also add fruit for secondary fermentation, like cherries, blackberries, and whatever. We're doing 12 ciders of the month, obviously, that'll all have different fruits or herbs or just different adjunct ingredients.
Thanks. And then Wes, could you talk to us a little bit about how you do a cider tasting? Is
Sure.
it the same as wine? Is it different?
Yeah, so it's very similar to wine. I always tell people that there's no wrong way to drink cider. However you choose to do it, you can do that. We usually go on our tasting room from dry to sweet. With what we're doing, we've kind of jumbled that up a little bit just to give you some more interesting flavor combinations of things, because we've made some really bold flavors and we don't want to try something really strong over here, and by the time you get to the end, you're not going to taste what you're having. So I've broken that rule we go by immediately, but that's usually a safe bet to go with. I usually recommend you pour your cider out of our can into a glass, and then that way you can swirl your glass and smell it. A lot of things you taste, you actually are smelling, so that's super helpful to do. And then just take sips, And for the way we usually do things, take a sip, swallow that, think about the things that you're tasting and like in the order you're tasting them. And then, have a second and third sip and really think about those things. And that's really helped you, find all the little nuances and things in cider.
Awesome. Okay. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start with Obscura. We're starting with Obscura because it's the driest cider we have tonight. It is blackberry cider, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there's no residual sugar added back in. There's just the sugar from the blackberries in Obscura. So it's our only one that we don't add sugar to of these four.
Yeah, so there's just a hint of residual sugar, and it all comes from the blackberries themselves. We ferment all the sugar out of the cider, and we don't back sweeten it with cane sugar like we would semi-sweets.
Great.
Yep.
So if you guys pour yourself a little glass of Obscura, Wes, what do you think we should do first? Smell it?
Oh, definitely smell it first.
Swirl the glass?
If you can, we have small glasses, but it'll swirl, get some air to it.
Take a little sip.
First thing I get are the tannins. They're bold and a little bit astringent, a little bitter.
So tannin is a wine term, but it's also used in cider, and it's like the drying astringent flavor you get in a bold red wine. Those have a lot of tannins, and a lot of our ciders, unless we have some of those like wine skins or apple skins, don't have a lot of tannin naturally. So how did we get tannin into Obscura?
So we used whole blackberries that we pureed. A lot of them came from a farm in Jasonville, Indiana, called District 6 Farms. And we used all the seeds and all the skins and all the fruit. Just pureed the whole thing and left it in the tank with the cider for a couple weeks to just infuse all that tannin and just create a rich, lush cider. Even though it's dry, it still has a lot of mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything kind of noteworthy about Obscura from a cider making standpoint?
It is our driest seasonal. We do a lot of semi-sweet ciders at Echanel because they're extremely popular, but this one is just the driest and most tannic one we make on a large scale.
Wes, tell me
Sure.
tell me your tasting notes and.
Yeah, so when I think on the nose, it's very kind of like an earthy berry notes. You can kind of, it's not just like a candy berry. You kind of can like get the earthiness to them as well. I think even when you taste it, I'm going to say earthy a lot on this one. I think it's not just a sweet berry flavor. There is sweetness, fruitiness there. But again, it's very earthy. And when we're talking about tannins, I think the kind of balance on those is the berries bring like a minerality, similar to some wines, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And then they kind of like the end kind of the tannin we add has a little bit of a chocolatey note to it at the end. So you get like a woody, chocolatey finish.
I almost forgot we add a little bit of oak tannin as well that just helps lengthen the finish and give it that just like little bit of oakiness somewhere in the chocolate vanilla kind of flavor family.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people that like red wine find that, when someone wants beer, when they come to our restaurant, we have, hop ciders. We have ciders with some of the citrus and sour notes that beer might have. So it's easy to figure out what to send them to. And if they like wine, we have a lot of options, or white wine. But when they like a red wine, it's harder to find a cider corollary. So I think Obscura was one of our ways of trying to do that with the extra tannin and the dry finish. So we kind of describe it to customers when they're not sure what to order as a bit of a dry rosé. And that tends to be kind of a wine drinker's cider.
Yeah.
Before we go to our next pairing, I have a couple questions.
All right.
Okay. Wes, can you maybe take this? Though I don't know since you don't drink a lot of beer, but how is a wine tasting different from a beer tasting?
Oh yeah, I'm not a big beer drinker. I admit that from the beginning.
I can help a little.
So yeah,
bit.
we'll ask Joe. He likes beer more than I do.
Beers are typically, you drink them from light to dark. So it's a similar principle that you would want to start with the most delicate flavors first, and then build up to the higher ABV dark beers. Just like we're starting with the least sweet cider and moving to more of a dessert cider at the end. So it's similar to beer in that way as well.
Yeah, and you would also want to kind of smell the beer and pull out those aromas and take a few sips. So in the actual ingesting of it, it's similar, but the order would be different. And beer is complicated too because there's the hop factor.
Yeah.
So you want to go light to dark, but if you have a super hoppy one, it will be really hard to taste anything after that. So you have to factor that third kind of element into beer.
True.
Yeah.
And with cider, there's a lot more appreciation, I think, of the variety of colors you can get compared to beer. But with beer, there's like more foam, like the protein structure creates a head on the beer that you can appreciate in different ways than you would a cider. So cider being a more light beverage, just the foam dissipates more quickly as well.
Great. And then another question, can you change the ABV of a cider?
Yeah. So
Say something about it.
of course, yeah. So if you're just starting with, just apple juice and you ferment that apple juice, you have a few options. The sugar converts to alcohol and carbon dioxide. So depending on how much sugar you ferment determines the amount of alcohol you have in the end. You can use a sweeter blend of apple juice to get more alcohol, or you can sweeten your apple juice before fermentation to create even more alcohol as well. So we'll talk more about that when we get to old fashioned because it is 8% ABV, and we did actually both techniques for that one to bring it up.
Great.
Yeah.
One last thing before we move on. What would you guys drink this cider with if you were eating?
I would say charcuterie right away. Any meats or cheeses, like it has that acidity to break them up and just pair with. It's got the fruitiness.
Yeah.
But specifically, I think you had some ideas on that, right?
Mine was just cheese, especially like a creamy cheese, something that the acidity in that can cut through. I like things a lot like that are reductive in that way.
Agreed. Okay, let's try our next one. We are going to move to, I think that one, is that right?
Yep.
Black raspberry lime? Okay.
Like I said, it's a weird order.
Yeah.
When I was doing our test run for this, I think this is a really fun order because we kind of we start kind of maybe not low in terms of quality, obviously, but in terms of like depth of flavor on this one. And we're going to kind of build up into a point and then kind of do a little bump, and then we're just going to go into this cool dessert thing at the end. It's kind of like a weird little.
It's like this is how you would have your drinks during a meal. Like
Yes.
That would be with your appetizer, your charcuterie appetizer, and then by the end we'll get to a dessert.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, so the next one we're having is black raspberry lime, which was our March cider of the month. And pause to take a little sniff and sip. One thing about Ashenome is we do not use any non-natural ingredients. So when I smelled this just now, if I didn't know that, it smells like candy.
Yeah.
It smells like we melted Skittles and poured it in, but it's all just natural fruit flavoring. So I just think that's interesting. Joseph, tell me about how we made black raspberry lime.
Yeah, so what you said, we started with apples, we added black raspberries, and we added lime. Like it's very simple in that way. There's a lot of work that goes into processing the limes. We always use fresh citrus. We've tried just different purees that are 100% fruit, and nothing compares to using fresh citrus with all of the zest and all of the juice. You just get this wonderful bright citrus, and limes also have a little bit of earthiness in the zest, which I think pairs really nicely with the black raspberries. And black raspberries this year were very difficult to find. When I contacted our fruit broker, he said they are liquid gold this year. He said 70% of the black raspberry crop in the Pacific Northwest was destroyed by a heat wave. But he was able to locate 400 pounds for us to use. And he got it to us just in time. This one almost got delayed, but we got it out. And it just has this amazing black raspberry flavor that you probably won't be able to find many other places this year.
And the color too is awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
It's awesome. You really see the black raspberries in that too.
Yeah. Wes, what kind of tasting notes do you get from this one?
Yeah, so this one I think is really cool because as you smell it, you get the citrus right at the beginning, which tends to usually be a thing you get towards the end, I find. So you get this really interesting like lime smell, and then as you taste it, there's tart citrus right at the beginning, and then you get the really interesting the black raspberry notes, like you said, almost candy-like notes from those. And then the part that I think is really neat at the end of that is there's this like an earthy lime. We were like,
It's almost bitter.
yeah, there's the bitter oils and things from the limes. This is a rough word, but it's the best word for that I like so much is funky. It has I think of limes are kind of funky. When there's something earthy, that's kind of, I think, what the implication is, it has this interesting funk to it that you really get. But especially as you, the more you have, and then as you swallow, that kind of stuff kind of comes up into your nose a little bit. So you get more and more lime each taste. Like I think on the initial taste, you might think there's not enough lime in there, and then as you have more, the lime kind of builds.
Yeah. And what would you guys eat with a black raspberry lime cider?
For me, it's dark chocolate all the way.
I
Dark
can see
chocolate and
that.
raspberries. It's a great night for me.
We were talking about this earlier. I thought maybe like fried chicken, something that's, there's a lot of fat and something like that, and the tartness of this, I think, helps kind of cut through that, and the brightness of the lime kind of accentuates those flavors.
Yeah. I was thinking about Thai food because Thai has such bright citrusy notes like lime juice and lemongrass, and I feel like it's not the same flavor component, but the lime would bring it together and kind of add a roundness to your meal as well. Cool. We have another question in between our next two ciders. Do you always use the whole apple, and do seeds and skins make the cider more bitter?
So there are some cider makers that are experimenting with this right now. We've done a couple small batches where we actually ferment on the seeds and skins of the apple, and it does create more tannin as well. Typically in pressing, though, most of the solids are strained out, and you just get a little bit of apple solids for the fermentation.
And does that make it more bitter? Did you kind of
Yeah,
answer
a
that
little bit
already?
more bitter. Apple tannins are their own kind of thing. It depends on what type of apple you're using as well. Like there's some English bittersweet, bitter sharp apples that have an almost black tea-like flavor that's just very astringent, leathery almost. But you wouldn't get that from a Granny Smith or a Golden Delicious.
I think sometimes too, if you're trying to make your own cider, your yeast adds bitterness to things. Your nutrient adds bitterness too. So depending on if you're over pitching or overfeeding, that can add different flavors and stuff too. But if you're settling that stuff out, you're probably not just going to have extra bitterness if that's something you'd be concerned about.
Okay, the third cider we're going to try is our January cider of the month, which is Old Fashioned. And the Old Fashioned is, we actually made it the first time in January of 2021, and it was not a cider of the month. We just kind of, we have some friends locally who are a distillery, and every once in a while they'll reach out and say, hey, we have a couple barrels. Do you guys want to age any cider in it? And so they did that last, like November 2020. And so we were like, oh, we have some extra Sunset. We have this barrel. What if we did something that was kind of like an old fashioned? So we did it. And if you remember in January of 2021, that was, I think, the Delta wave. It's hard to remember which wave we were at in which January, but pretty sure it was Delta. And it was kind of rough, just like this most recent January was. And so, it was one of those things. And also January, just if you don't work in the food and beverage industry, January is like a down month. It's usually the worst month of every restaurant's year because everyone has kind of spent a lot of money in December for holidays. They've kind of gone out a lot. They've celebrated a lot. They've eaten and drank a lot. And so in January, you get hit by people with New Year's resolutions to lose weight or spend less money or drink less. There's this dry January thing, and the weather is bad. And so generally January is like a cliff for restaurants. And so we're always trying to think of ways we can get people to still want to come see us in January. So we don't, really bite the dust during that month. And so we were like, oh, maybe we could release this old fashioned cider in January and have some reason for people to come in, even though they've been here a lot in December. And it was really super popular. So as we were planning our next cider of the month release, we usually have those conversations in like August, September of a year. We'll start thinking of the next year's 12 ciders. So as we were talking about it, we kind of thought, well, could we put it in the can and make that our January cider of the month? It's a little bit different than usual because it is a higher alcohol cider. And most of our ciders of the month are right around that 6.5%. And this one is 8%, but we decided, what the hey? It's been a pandemic for 2 years. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
So Joseph, tell us about this one.
Yeah, so we took a lot of Sunset and put it into the Old Hamer bourbon barrels from West Fork Whiskey, and just let all the natural sugar from the cherries ferment out. We added a little bit of cane sugar as well to just really bump up that ABV a little extra. And just, got a lot of those oaky bourbon, kind of brown sugar, vanilla notes that come from bourbon barrel aging. And it was our Sunset Tart Cherry Cider as well, so you get that sour cherry note as well. And I think, oh yeah, you can't forget the orange zest. It's the finishing note of an old fashioned. So we peeled, what was it? About 300 oranges. We zested 300 oranges and put the zest into the tank with the cider and just let all the orange oils infuse. This is a rare case where we didn't use any of the orange juice. We didn't want that citric acid note. We just wanted those bitter orange oils like you would have in a twisted orange zest from an old fashioned.
Yeah. I've been sipping along this whole time.
Yeah, so this
guys.
one's fun to talk about because it's a lot of stuff, and you get a lot of interesting notes that aren't actually ingredients that we added ourselves. I think first off, when you kind of smell it, you get a little hint of orange, and you get the bourbon for sure on it. You can smell the 8% alcohol in a way that I feel like you can't the 6.5. You know what you're about to get into. It also has this really interesting on the nose and on a sip, like a maple syrup kind of thing. And it's like I said, there's no maple syrup. This is just the tannins of our barrels with all the awesome bourbon flavor that was already sucked up into the wood on those. And then you get the cherry is actually a lot more subdued through that process. And then you get a really nice the orange just at the end. Like I said, this one's like a really fun kind of roller coaster of different flavors and tannin profiles and things.
Yeah, I kind of get, and I mean this in the best possible way, but it's a little bit medicinal in a way that I like. I think, you think of kids' cough syrup and it's got the fake cherry or the fake orange. And this is like the real version for adults. It's our medicine sometimes. But it's really good. And I do like, I tend to, no matter what I'm drinking, when there's a high ABV version of it, like a strong imperial stout or an imperial IPA or an extra strong cider, I really like those, even though I don't really like liquor. So I'm not sure what that is, but
yeah, this one.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
We also released this in January because it's a cider to sip and savor, and it warms you a little bit with the alcohol. This wouldn't be as refreshing on a hot summer day as a margarita would. So That's why we purposely put it, at the coldest time of year when it can be a comforting cider.
Yeah, that is one thing that we always struggle with when we're creating our cider of the month calendar is how to make, there aren't really any great heavy ciders. In beer, you can have your stouts and porters and these darker, heavier beers in the winter when you kind of want to hole in. Cider, there's just a lot fewer options there. So whenever we're coming up with the calendar and we're thinking of fruits and we're thinking of spices, it's always in the back of our mind, how do we make this something you would want to drink in the or in the very cold winter? and not drink it and immediately think, oh, I wish I was on a beach somewhere. So, yeah.
Sometimes with this one too, depending on the temperature of it, I sometimes get a, you said medicinal, I sometimes get like a bubble gum kind of note from it.
Yeah, the fruity esters from the cherries, since we ferment them actually in the barrel, it brings out all these esters. The yeast consumes the fruit and just chemically changes it into this thing that has a bubblegum note. It's all real from the fruit. It's not like we're adding cherry flavoring or cherry concentrate. It's 100% pure cherry.
Awesome. Well, we do have a question about this specific cider. How do you time the whiskey flavor infusion?
It's a good question. It really depends on the barrel. I would say if you're not tasting your barrel at least once a week, then you could overshoot it or undershoot it. And like different barrels, I mean, it's a real natural product. It's oak, and it has every piece has a different grain to it. And they're charred by hand in Kentucky. So you really just have to keep tasting along as you go. And thankfully we can blend different things together. If one finishes in 3 weeks, but the other at 6 or 9 or 12 weeks, we can kind of blend that together to get the profile that we were shooting for. So this is, I think, 12 different barrels that we blended together to get the exact flavor profile we wanted.
That answer segues into another question. How long did it take to get Old Fashioned right? Did it take multiple tries?
This is the second time we've made it. The first time we just had 3 barrels, and I think some of those bubblegum notes were more pronounced.
Some weird watermelon notes.
Yeah, we didn't have as many barrels to play with and blend perfectly. So when we made it the second time, we said, let's scale this up to a full cider in the month level, not just 150 gallons, but 900 gallons, so that we can really play with it.
Yeah, I think one thing I've observed with some of our ciders that are barrel aged is that they change over time once they're packaged. I don't know if it's the same in a can because we haven't done many canned barrel. This is the first canned barrel. No, Autumn Tide.
It's the first large scale.
One of the first canned barrel aged ciders we've done. But when we've done them in a bottle, sometimes people get these barrel aged bottles and it feels special, so you want to savor it and hold on to it. And there have been times I've opened it and felt like this was maybe a little too long because the barrel characteristic outweighs the kind of more delicate cider side. And so I think there's always a balance. I don't know if it will keep changing in a can though because of being pasteurized.
We've noticed a little change already from January to now.
Okay.
The barrel introduces oxygen, and if you know anything about fermentation, oxygen is like fuel for fermentation, so it just makes things more volatile and ready to change. Some of that oxygen makes it into the can. We try and minimize oxygen so it stays pretty stable, but Old Fashioned, it's going to be the one that changes most over time. So maybe save a can for 3 months, one for 6 months, one for 9, and you'll see which way you like it the best.
Or drink them all now before it gets really warm.
Joe said my favorite thing we tell people all the time when they ask how we come up with things: taste everything.
Yeah.
Always be tasting
These guys are
things.
always drinking on the job.
It's true.
But it's their job, so it's okay.
But we always learn. We're never just drinking to drink something.
Yeah.
We have discussions with people about things you're drinking, and if you're making cider yourself, share that with someone else, get someone else's perspective, because there may be things that you notice that they don't, or something that they might surprise you and say, "Oh, I really get this." You're like, "I didn't taste that at all." Like, tasting stuff is the best way to figure out how long things need or things like that too.
What would you drink an Old Fashioned with if you were eating at the same time?
I had some Gomez barbecue the other day, their smoked chicken quesadilla, and it paired perfectly with the Old Fashioned. The smoked chicken notes went with the cherry and brown sugar notes from the bourbon barrel. And I tell everyone, go to Gomez Barbecue at 10th and Rural and open up an Old Fashioned.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
We'll see.
If you have cherry in anything, I always say barbecue.
Yeah. I
Barbecue sauce and cherry.
can't
is so
disagree.
well.
Yep. Okay, we have one more question, but I'm going to save it for the end, just so we have some at the end. So the next cider we're going to drink is our Blueberry Lavender. This one is another redux from 2020. So in 2021, that was our fifth full year of doing the Cider of the Month program. And 2020 was a bit of a tough year for everybody, including us. And it was kind of like, you know what, let's, instead of working super hard to come up with 12 new flavors, what if in this fifth year we kind of do a celebratory look back at some of our most popular flavors over the last 5 years. And so it was the first time last year that we repeated any Cider of the Month flavors, and several of them were repeated. I want to say maybe 5 or 6 of the 12 were straight repeats. Actually, weren't they all? They were all repeats. They were all repeats, but 5 or 6 were from 2020.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So Blueberry Lavender was, yes, this is our third time doing it, because the first time we did it, it was released in February 2020, so before COVID. And I've told this story a couple different places, but I don't know if everyone has heard it that's listening here. February is also when CiderCon happens, which we attend every year. And in 2020, CiderCon was in Oakland, California. So the three of us, Aaron, and I think that was it, we were all out of town. But it happened to fall on the first Saturday of the month when we'd be releasing Blueberry Lavender. And there's also a Indianapolis restaurant thing where there's something called Devour Indie, and that was happening that same Saturday as well. And it was like a week or two before we left when I looked at the calendar and I realized, oh no, Blueberry Lavender is getting released on a Saturday, the same Saturday of Devour Indie, also the same Saturday 4 of the main employees will be out of town. And what are we going to do? And I can usually tell from monitoring social media and the events whether something is going to be popular or not based on comments and people getting excited. And this one was like off the charts before we released it. And I was like, it's going to be a huge day. We're all going to be gone. And so we did a lot of planning and prep, and it was a huge day. And I think it was, one, it's the name. Blueberry Lavender just sounds delicious. And then these guys made it really great, and it still is one of the ones that people talk about all year long. No one is ever going to complain if we do it every February for the rest of our business's life. And I don't want to have too many of those, because part of the fun of the program is having new stuff all the time, but I do think we would lose more members if I took Blueberry Lavender off than if I kept it on. So this one has just kind of become it's our busiest Saturday. It's great in February, and people love it, and I hope you guys do too.
We do change it too, to be fair. We still keep it interesting for ourselves and everybody else also. So
how did we do this?
Yeah, so again, real fruit. We used, I want to say, over 2,000 pounds of blueberries. It was a ridiculous amount of blueberries. And then real lavender as well. We did both fresh lavender and dried lavender flowers and the stalks and stems and leaves of lavender plants as well, just to give it tons of complexity and tons of flavors for us to play with, the cider makers. The fresh lavender has an almost rosemary-like cinnamon quality to it that's more herbal, like herb of Provence, sort of French savory herbs. And the dried lavender flowers are more floral, like your lavender, I hate to say it, but shampoos and hand soaps. The first year we made it, we only used dried lavender flower, and we thought we can only put just the slightest amount of lavender in there before it gets overwhelmingly soapy. But then we discovered that fresh lavender adds this earthy, herbal, savory quality. So yeah, that's what's going on here. It's different types of lavender. And just tons of blueberries on top of a 90% apple base.
What do you get when you smell and taste this one?
yeah, so this one's really interesting. I think when you smell it, you definitely get the blueberries. Kind of, to me, blend so much with the lavender, like they're kind of this interesting little dance happening that I don't think you can really separate them too much from one another. But you do, like he was saying, get that. The herbaceous, like interesting, almost peppery, minty notes from the greens that we use from the fresh lavender. But you can smell those, I think, a lot especially on the nose. But as you take sips of it, you get the blueberry. The blueberry lavender for me, everything else I always kind of think of as like stages of flavors that we get. This one in particular, the blueberries and lavender go so well together. they're just all at the same time. I get both of those. And then, except then you get that's that really interesting flower note. And then as you move through it, there's the more complex, earthy, peppery notes of the lavender. So you get the more layered parts there, I think. And it has a really smooth finish. This one always makes me kind of excited at the end. Just as I said, it's like this perfect dessert to this super complex, old-fashioned, notes, and it's really kind of smooth and balanced out, sweeter cider.
Yeah. What would you guys eat with this?
So just going on the savory herb side, I would do like a fondue with French bread, like a French baguette sort of thing, just something cheesy and bready and savory.
I have a sweet tooth, so I would say cheesecake.
So I had a different answer, but then when you said savory herbs, I realized like a pork roast with like all of those, like if you have a sachet of herbs that's roasted with the pork, I think this would be delicious with that. But before that, I was going to say brunch. We do a cider brunch, and like this goes great with pancakes and maple syrup, and we had it the other day with biscuits and gravy, and it was great. It almost doesn't taste like alcohol in a way, and it's a very brunchy. It's almost like a mimosa in a can if the mimosa were blueberry flavored. So I think it's great for like a day drinking with brunch. But now I'm changing my mind to pork roast.
Pork roast.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have one more question, and it is, how do you decide if the flavor is good or needs to be adjusted? And the question I'm adding onto this is, what have we done when we have not liked a flavor? How have we corrected when we have decided this is not good enough?
It's a great question. So we tasted along the way. I would say we taste every cider every day just to make sure that it's going as planned. So we always intervene early if we need to. Whether that's during fermentation, when we receive the apple juice, even before fermentation, or during, an infusion process. We like to save a little bit, like when we blend something, we save some just plain apple that we can blend in with the blueberry and just find that perfect flavor combination. So that's the first thing that jumps to mind.
We keep saying infusion, but we are really good about saying it in broad ways. We do lots of small infusions for some of our more complex flavors. So we make a blueberry infusion for a blueberry lavender. We're not making a tiny blueberry infusion. We're putting all of our blueberries into a tank with cider on top of it. But since lavender can be so tricky, we're not just going, 3 handfuls will be good. We're chopping it up, measuring it out, putting it into individual, vessels and doing infusions with that. That way we can control at the end how much lavender does this need, and we can do bench trials, and we can do a bunch of different tastings with different amounts of lavender and sugar to figure out like, is this the balance we wanted? That way we have more granular control over flavor at the end of our process.
Yeah.
And we scale up. I mean, we'll start with just mixing something with a spoon and a glass and say, do we like this flavor combination? Then we'll try a growler. Then we'll try a 5-gallon batch. Then we'll try a whole tank. So we have a pretty good idea of how it's going to go when we get started.
How have you corrected if anything has ever gone really wrong?
Blending, like they blend a lot in the wine world, like they'll blend multiple barrels, and same with the whiskey world. So blending is the easiest technique. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? No. Okay.
I would say at the last question too, you can always pivot. Like it's harder for us because we announce these things so far ahead of time.
Yeah.
So let's say you're like, I'm going to make a cherry cider, and you get to the end and it's, I don't really know if I like it so much. You could throw that in a barrel and make an old fashioned cider. You could, if you think that would help your thing, like we don't like to throw out things. So
Yeah. In our early years, before we had kind of people keeping tabs on what we put on social media and following along with what we were working on, we could pivot. We could say like, ooh, this is really bad, so let me just throw a little bit of grapefruit zest in there to cover up that little flavor we don't like, and then we'll change the name, and now it's this. And we don't have that much flexibility anymore. I think we could still do it, but there's always that balance between trying to promote things to get people to know it's coming and get excited about it versus making last minute changes. So we have less and less flexibility with that. Oh, we do have another question. Thank you.
While you're reading that, I will say that, for instance, on black raspberry lime, we'd never made that before. And like I said, the black raspberries were very late in arriving at our cidery. So we did not have a lot of chances to make, 4 different versions before the full batch. So what I did was I made a batch of lime cider and a batch of black raspberry cider and blended them together at the very end so that I could decide exactly how much lime do we want in this cider versus black raspberry. And we did trial after trial. Everybody who walked by, hey, can you try this? Does this have too much lime? Does this have too much black raspberry? Things like that. Yeah.
Someone is asking, what are the tea notes in the blue lavender?
Tea notes. Yeah, so it's like an herbal tea, like a lavender tea. It's all from the lavender. We did lavender infusions that were basically just herbal tea, but instead of using hot water as a base, we did cider as the base and kind of a cold brew version with cider instead.
That's the fresh lavender, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of it is like I said, it's it's a flower that's this big, and then there's this much of a stem with leaves on it, and we just use all of the whole thing. So I think some of that's the combination of that fresh lavender with the greens on from the flower itself.
Awesome.